Finally, I get to introduce Lorenn from the ANU School of Cybernetics, who will be talking to us about centering dignity, the responsible design of human-machine collaborations and exploration. Thanks for joining.
All right, so hi everyone. Welcome finally to this talk, which is all about centering dignity and the responsible design of human-machine collaboration. And this is a very exploratory talk, and I'm here today on behalf of myself and also my supervisor, Katherine Daniell. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the majority of this work has been undertaken on Ngunnawal and Ngambri lands in Canberra in Australia, where the ANU is and where I'm doing my PhD, and acknowledge all of the Indigenous lands that we're meeting on physically and virtually today. So I'm going to do, it's a pretty short talk, so I'm going to really just do a couple of things. The first is talk a bit about this intersection between cybernetics, dignity, and human-machine collaboration, and what I sort of mean by those big, meaty terms in a little bit of detail. And then think about what it means when we think about human-machine collaboration in terms of the emerging research agenda to think through from this intersection of lenses. And then, you know, hopefully we'll have a time for a couple of questions. So in terms of this intersection, so just to put it visually, I'm interested in what thinking about cybernetics, concepts of dignity, and human-machine collaboration could yield in terms of potential avenues for future research. And in terms of the term human-machine collaboration, I'm using this term rather liberally to mean human-machine teaming, human-machine or human-AI teaming in the broader sense of what does the emerging research agenda kind of look like. And in terms of moving that thingy, I will just try to minimize that so you can see. Okay, and it really has a mind of its own. And so in terms of cybernetics, obviously that in itself is a really meaty term. So I wanted to sort of pull out two concepts connected to the field of cybernetics that I think could be of relevance to this area today. And the first is this idea that cybernetics is the study of purposive systems. And the second, and these purposive systems comprise of technological, social, and environmental elements. And these are all working and shaped by human values. And the second cybernetic concept that I'd like to draw on is this idea of second-order cybernetics, which makes explicit one's positionality in the system. So as designers or entrepreneurs or researchers or engineers, we're not just observing the system or creating a system out there, we're actually part of the system. So second-order cybernetics is interested in studying the interaction between the observed and the observer. And we'll come back to these two concepts of cybernetics in a few minutes. In terms of dignity, now this is also like a really big, gnarly question. What is dignity? The first part of my PhD research has been looking at different concepts of dignity across different disciplines and different cultures. And I'm deliberately engaging in a plurality of what dignity could mean. So I'm not sort of picking one at the moment, or I'm not trying to smush them all together. But for the purposes of today, I thought I would just highlight sort of 5 different ways of thinking about dignity and think about what sorts of questions might emerge for human-machine collaboration when we think through these concepts of dignity. And there's lots more concepts of dignity. These are just a few for the purposes of this talk. So the first concept I'd like to sort of highlight is what I'm calling here foundational dignity or inviolable dignity. This is often referred to in sort of human rights instruments. And it's broadly about dignity being something that's unique to humans, that you can't give it, you can't take it away, and it's something that every person has. And if we think about that in the context of human-machine collaboration, we might come up with some questions like, how can we train the machine to see us as people rather than just, you know, another variable? Or should the machine collaborators be flagged as being machines, or is it better if they're actually disguised as humans? The second concept of dignity is sort of this idea of dignity of choice, which is often very connected to autonomy. And this idea that you need to be afforded a dignity to choose, to be able to make independent decisions and to take risks. And in the context of HMC, these ideas or questions around what effect do the machines actually have on our ability to choose and to make decisions? And also, how can we choose not to engage with a machine in the context of a human-machine collaboration? The third concept here is one I'm calling dignity as experience. And this is really about a desire to be seen, heard, listened to be really understood and recognized in the world for who we are and our, like the totality of us as people. And this is connected to a lot of other ideas that have come up in association with motion, for example, or having a dignified experience. And so in terms of HMCs, you know, how might we make human-machine teammates able to distinguish between me versus Caitlin versus Miana as individuals? And how might we be able to customize the experience so that I'm having a dignified experience in a human-machine team? And the fourth concept here is something a little less talked about because it often comes from non-Western views of dignity, which frame it as like a communal responsibility. So we have this responsibility to use our dignity for the communal benefit, and that then reinforces our own individual sense of dignity. And so some questions here are connected to Caitlin's talk around, you know, how might we contribute to a more inclusive society through the creation of HMCs, but also, you know, what sorts of collectives might we consider as important when designing the future of HMCs? And the final one I want to highlight here is actually environmental dignity, which is, you know, slightly tangential to some of the others, but this right to live in an environment of quality that actually permits us to actually have dignity. And in this sense, these questions around, you know, does the problems that the HMC actually solve warrant the environmental impacts that we're creating? And how would we actually start to account for these environmental impacts, not just in the here and now, but across the whole life cycle? So with this sort of thinking in place, I suppose then what I was interested in is looking at, well, where is the current state of human-machine collaboration in terms of its research agenda kind of coming at, and what might this sort of thinking sort of come to bear? And so I looked at a few different framings, and so I'll be interested if there are others. I'm sure there are others, but there's three that I wanted to touch on here. And I'm not going to go into what they are, just to say that these are the three that I looked at. And this first one here is HACO, which is a framework for developing human AI teaming by Dudley now. So these are all examples of how they're framing the debate about what needs to be researched in human-machine collaboration. The second one is Sieber and Al's Machines as Teammates Research Agenda from 2020. And the third is Caldwell and Al's Agile New Research Framework for Hybrid Human AI Teaming. So I looked at these three frameworks, and so I have sort of three reflections that I just want to share around thinking about these research agendas in the context of cybernetics and dignity. So the first thing to note is that there are some aspects of dignity already considered in the HMC research agenda. So this slide that we were talking through here, actually these questions in brown have come directly from Sieber and Al's research agenda. Now, this doesn't mean that they're actually being researched upon, but at least they've been identified. And then I looked in the literature around, you know, is there already people talking about dignity in the context of HMCs? And I found two papers. They're both sitting in this dignity as experience sort of column. One's in the context of dignity in human resource management decision-making in human AI teams. And the second one, this Formosa one, is the context of medical AI teams, diagnostic testing and resource allocation context. But that being said, you know, there's a lot of other things that we could use a dignity lens to sort of surface in terms of these other categories around dignity of choice, as dignity as communal responsibility particularly, and environmental dignity isn't one that was particularly obvious, which brings me to the second point, which is that these research agendas generally are sitting at this intersection between the social and the technological. And if we were to take a cybernetics lens to this, environmental factors would be considered within the boundary of what is important and relevant. However, these aren't particularly evident in those research agendas that I looked at, and neither is environmental dignity as a result. So perhaps we could include and start to consider environmental considerations in the HMC research agenda going forward. And finally, there's not a huge amount of direct emphasis on researching the values underlying the HMCs in these frameworks. Now, they might be implicit in some of the other categories, but they're not there physically as separate research agenda items. So this idea that they're generally focused on the observed system and not necessarily on the observer, so their positionality and their values that are underlying. So we might want to consider including some of these second-order cybernetic considerations in the research agenda. So overall, if we really want to create HMCs that avoid dehumanizing us and enable our dignity, then we need to work out how to center dignity in how we think about human-machine collaborations and ensure that it has a place in the research agendas that we're creating right now that's shaping what research we will do. And I hope that this opens a conversation about how we might progress the HMC research agenda forward with dignity in view. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lorenn. We have time for one question.
I know there's a lot of research on AI fairness. How do you think of, how do you think that's related to the study of dignity? Do you think of them as completely separate, or do you think some of the research in fairness is related to something?
So, sort of two ways that I would think about that question. One is some of the models of dignity that I've come across actually talk explicitly about fairness. So, for example, a model by Donna Hicks, which is used in international conflict resolution, has fairness as one of the core components, that you need fairness to actually have a sense of dignity. So there is a link there. But I think the other thing from the fairness sort of conversation that I think is sort of to avoid is that there's a lot of reduction of fairness into these sort of mathematical constraints. And this is something perhaps we might not want to try and do, to follow that model for when it comes to dignity. So I think there's certainly a lot to be learned from what's happening in fairness, because it's also sort of a nebulous concept, difficult to operationalize. And my PhD research is all about how we might operationalize dignity.
Thank you very much.